Welcome to the Bayes Server channel. Bayes Server is a powerful tool for building Bayesian networks and causal AI models. In today's video, we're going to be running through the Retracted Analysis tutorial. Okay, so what does Retracted Analysis do? Well, it evaluates the difference between the actual value of a variable, which we call the evidence, and the predicted value of the same variable when calculated without the evidence on it, just for that variable. And this is known as retracted evidence. Also, it calculates the log likelihood with all evidence set and compares it to the log likelihood without evidence set on that particular variable. Now, why is that useful? Well, it allows us to identify unusual behavior, perhaps it's like sensor failures or engine failure or something like that in a data set. We can do these calculations across an entire data set and then see if there's any unusual behavior, which is incredibly powerful. And not only can we detect unusual behavior, it pinpoints what the causes of that unusual behavior are. And it may not just be a single variable that's causing the issue, it's often more than one. We'll now switch over to the tutorial itself and run through the steps as you see them in the standard help. So the first thing we need to do is open the built-in waste network. So let's do that. From the start page, you'll see all the built-in networks here, and we just single click on waste. We'll make that a little bit bigger just for the purposes of this tutorial. Okay. So what do we do next? Okay, so there's a data set we need to download first. So if we click on this to download it, let's take a look at this data for starters. Now, this data set has 400 data points in it over 4 different variables. And we know that the first 300 data points are considered normal, after which the system starts to degrade over the remaining 100. So let's see if we can use the Retracted Analysis tool to detect that. We'll start by taking a look at the data. So all I've done here is opened the file that we downloaded in Excel. You can see there's 4 variables here and there are 400 data points. And we know that the last 100 the system starts to degrade. So we can see here I've created line charts for each variable. So you can see a chart here for dust emission. And if you look at it, yes, it varies over those 400 data points, but there's not really anything really obvious happening in the last 100. And the same can be said for each of these plots. So CO2 concentration, again, in the last 100 points, it's not doing anything, by eyeballing it that looks particularly crazy. And the same for the other ones as well. So this is why retracted analysis, or equally a log likelihood analysis, might provide something better than a univariate analysis would. And that's what we're going to look at today. Now that we've had a quick peek at the data, let's launch the Retracted Analysis tool. Now to find that, it's under Analyze and Retracted here. So let's click on that. And now it's asking us for a data connection. So what we're going to do is we're going to load up that spreadsheet we just downloaded into Bayes Server. In order to do that, we can click on this ellipsis here. Click the Add button in the Data Connection Manager, and then in the New Data Connection dialog we can click Open File. Now I just selected that file I downloaded, and you can see it's actually loaded it into memory, and we've got 400 rows and 5 columns, one of the columns just being that case column. We could also connect to a database or a variety of other data sources. For the purposes of this video, we're just using a spreadsheet to keep it simple. So now we have that loaded, let's click OK. And you can now see it in the Connection Manager, so we can close this dialog. Now in the Data Tables selection, we should now be able to see our connection, which we can. And there is only one sheet, so we're just going to select the first sheet. And then we can OK that. Now you can see it's asking us to map data to our variables. And in this case, we've only got 4 columns of data. And you can see they've automatically been mapped. So CO2 concentration is mapped to CO2 concentration in the database, and so on for these 4 variables. So just double check that that looks correct and then move on. Click OK. So now we're going to perform a retracted analysis. The first thing to do in the options dialog is to select the variables we're interested in. So we'll come in here and we'll deselect burning regimen and select the 4 variables of interest. So we've got CO2 concentration, metals in waste, dust emission and metals emission. There are some further options in here, but in this case we're just going to use the defaults. So then click Run. So in the Results tab, we can see 4 additional tabs, one for each variable with the Retracted Analysis results. There will be 2 charts, one for each variable, and also a Data tab if you want to extract the data and process it in another environment. We'll actually come back to the CO2 concentration variable and look at the others first. So if we switch to metals in waste, now let's cover both of these charts. So what we can see here is the yellow is our actual data. So that's the data that was in our spreadsheet. And then the blue line is the predicted value of metals in waste had that data been missing, but still with the other values for dust emission, metals emission and CO2 concentration present. So essentially we're just removing the evidence on metals in waste, doing a prediction for what metals in waste would be, and then comparing the two. Now we can see here that for the first 300 or so points they're quite similar, and there's nothing really stand out. There's some variability which you would expect, but it looks pretty good. However, towards the last 100 points you can see it starts deviating quite significantly, and this is where the system's actually degrading, and so the model's picked up on that. Rather, the retracted analysis has picked up on that. Now in the second chart we're doing something quite similar, but we're calculating something called the log likelihood. Now the log likelihood gives us an indication of how likely it is that that model could have generated that data. And in this case, again, we can see that for the first 300, the log likelihood versus the log likelihood without the data point of interest looks very similar. But as the system starts to degrade, we can see that the log likelihood versus the log likelihood without that piece of evidence varies massively, and that indicates that there's potentially a problem with that variable. But of course, not everything is univariate, so there could be other variables that look bad as well. So let's check dust emission, and you can see a very similar picture here. You can see there's quite a bit of deviation in the prediction from the actual, and again the log likelihood differs wildly, indicating there's an issue with this variable as well. And metals emission, exactly the same story there. Lastly, if we look at CO2 concentration, there's a slightly different picture here. Towards the end, there is some variability, but it's not quite so clear. And again, the difference between the log likelihood and the log likelihood without that variable is almost identical. So potentially CO2 looks okay, but those 3 other variables in conjunction are causing the problem. What's important here is that a univariate analysis would not have picked this up. So this becomes an incredibly powerful tool to do things like anomaly detection. Okay, so that wraps up this tutorial. Thanks very much for watching, and do subscribe and like this video if you want to see more. Thanks again.